Welcome everybody to another TEL Researchers and HEresearchers series. Today is a little bit of a special session. As you can see, so many of our faces on the screen because today is a panel discussion brought to you by the Centre for TEL at Lancaster University, for which all the panelists are or will be members of. So the topic today is about the joy, the challenge, the good and the bad times and everything in between for embarking on a doctoral research journey. So we have 4 students from the TEL program at Lancaster, and we have 4 supervisors from the department as well, who will be sharing just our thoughts and insight into how we have managed to put up with each other and nobody has killed anyone yet. I will introduce myself first. My name is Puyin Wong. I am a 4th year PhD student on the e-research and TEL program with the Education Department at Lancaster University. And I'm also the Innovation and Scholarship Manager at Queen Mary, University of London. So I'm at the point of writing or attempting to write my thesis, and the kind of research topic is about whether or not there are benefits to higher education educators to producing and maintaining educational podcasts. So the focus isn't really on the students as such. It's more on the benefits of professional development to staff, which is something that I never thought I would do as a research piece. So we'll go into that later if the opportunity arises. So I'll pass the mic on to John.
Hello, everybody. So my name's John Brindle. If you've been to these enough, you know my face already. But I am also 4th year PhD student on the e-research and TEL program. Supervised by Brett, so I've got to be really careful what I say right now. But I am also learning design manager at Hedge University in the northwest of England, and I am researching how people in the third space make sense of inclusive practice. So I've kind of veered away from the TEL stuff a little bit, but it's absolutely fascinating. I'm using interpretative phenomenological analysis to do that, which I'm absolutely loving, although the data analysis is a pain. So I think, who did I say I was going to pass on to next? I'm going to pass on to James next. I think that's what I said I was going to do.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. I'm James Allen, Senior Learning Designer Team Lead at the University of Southampton, which has been my workplace for the last 10 years. My research interests are around the adoption of novel and immersive technologies for use in education, so things like 360-degree images in virtual field trips. I've just submitted a draft for my 3rd assignment on the programme, and hopefully received some lovely feedback from my course convener, who's also on the call. Yeah, so that's me. I'm going to pass you over to, as Puyin calls her, my work wife, Tamsin.
Hi, I'm Tamsin Smith. Like James, I'm a Senior Learning Designer Team Lead at the University of Southampton. I've been there for about a dozen years, and I'm also a 2nd year student on the e-research and TEL programme. And unlike James, I don't really have a clear idea of necessarily exactly where my research interests are at the moment. I've tried something different for each module. So the most recent module, I've been exploring digital capabilities and engineering students. And I'm going to pass over to Brett.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brett Bly. I'm the Director of the Doctoral Programme in E-Research and Technology Enhanced Learning at Lancaster. I've been working in the field of TEL for something approaching 20 years when you take my PhD into account. My interests have long been about conceptualizing how technologies play a role in actual human practices rather than studying technologies in isolation. In the last at least 10 years, I've used activity theory to do that. I'm particularly interested in how practices are transformed, both because technology is used often as a vehicle for transforming practices in institutions, and also epistemologically through the conviction that unless we understand how things change, we don't actually understand where we were when we started. So it's only through trying to change the world that we try to understand it. So my more recent work has focused on an approach called the Change Laboratory, From a technology enhanced learning perspective, I'm interested in that in at least two ways. One of those is how can change laboratories be used to promote the more democratic and participative co-design of technology enhanced learning practices? And the other angle is how can technology be used to support change laboratory processes, for example, by bringing together co-design projects over distance, for example, on the internet. Am I supposed to nominate somebody else too, in which case I will nominate Kathy.
Thank you, Brett. Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy. I'm a lecturer in technology enhanced learning, and my research focuses on the kind of intersection between online distance education and care and well-being. That's what I'm particularly interested in. I'm a narrative researcher. I love stories, and what we can learn from stories really fascinates me. And just recently, I've been doing a study of a WhatsApp community and looking at its impact on learning and professional development for those of us involved, but also looking at its impact on health and well-being. And I will pass on to Katie.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. So I'm Katie Jordan. I'm a lecturer in technology enhanced learning, and I joined the department and the group at Lancaster last year. So I've been working in technology enhanced learning as a field in various different roles, from sort of research assistant to learning technologist to PhD student and onwards, for nearly 20 years now. And during that time, I've worked on various different projects, usually in education, but some looking at technology in schools. Before I joined Lancaster, I was most recently involved in a large-scale research programme called the EdTech Hub, based at Cambridge, and that had a very broad remit of looking at technology use to support school-aged learners and teachers in low and middle-income country settings. But at the moment, my main research interests are focused around social media in higher education and algorithms in digital scholarship. So I've recently concluded a project on that, and currently writing various things up. Lots of exciting outputs on the way. I would describe myself as being a mixed methods researcher. I'm a bit of a magpie, actually, when it comes to research methods. I very much enjoy trying new things out, particularly in relation to sort of digital and online approaches. So yeah, that's me, and I will pass to Phil.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. I'm Phil Moffat. I work at the Department of Educational Research at Lancaster University. I'm interested in technology enhanced learning and expansive change, so situations where technology is embroiled in practice problems and people have a need for learning which is only really identified at the time and point of that need. So, you know, most of the research I do is about problems with organisational arrangements and technology enhanced learning. Unsurprisingly, I'm an activity theorist and change laboratorian because that helps us to establish problems with social practice rather than things. You know, I'm one of the alumni members. I completed a PhD on the HEresearchers and Technology Enhanced Learning programme in 2019. I was supervised by Brett Bly, who hasn't yet had quite enough attention. And I subsequently started as a member of the team of the department about a year ago, which has flown by. Nice to meet you all.
So the first thing we thought might be quite interesting for us to discuss is why doctoral study. Is being a student important to learn to become a researcher?
So for me, so I applied for this program, and actually Simon's on the call a little bit as well. So Simon and another colleague, Tunde Varga-Atkins, who's also appeared on this this seminar series. Simon, I think, was doing his research, and Tunde had just graduated, and I'd just finished my master's degree in blended and online learning, and I felt like there was a little bit more in the tank. how wrong was I? No, I'm joking. And I really kind of felt like I had more to learn and more to go through. So I chatted to Tunde, chatted to Simon, chatted to another couple of people who had PhDs as well, who I thought, is that really the right thing for me? And then learning from Simon and Tunde's experience of this program in particular is why I chose this program, which I think is going to be the next question that other people are going to be answering. But I think the reason of doing doctoral study and PhD was that I thought I needed the structure to learn how to research a little bit more. I didn't think I was quite ready to kind of start throwing papers out left, right, and centre and going, look at how great I am. I just felt like I needed to develop a bit more confidence in my research ability. So I think being a student and learning, I think we're never not students. I think we're always constantly learning anyway. I think once you acknowledge that, then it kind of makes the idea of doing a program like this a little bit better. But yeah, so all my friends joke that I'm a perpetual student because I've been, I'm 42 and still studying, but I'm going to be studying for a lot longer. So so it's kind of those kinds of things, really. So yeah, for me, being a student was important. And again, I was attracted to the cohortness of this, and still have, just for Kathy's research, we have a Discord that I still actually have personal messages on that Discord from people, even though as a cohort we don't do it. And obviously I met people like Puyin as well through it all. So yeah, I think being a student was important. Doctoral study was important to develop that confidence and develop that greater understanding of what research is. I've never used words like epistemology and ontology before until I had long conversations with Phil, and thinking about theoretical perspectives and things, and it's transformed the way that I think about theory and how it's integrated with practice. So yeah, that's why.
I mean, we're going to move, I think in a subsequent question, we'll move on to why you might want to do a structured PhD. So I'm just going to talk very generally about doing a PhD at this point. I think it's about wanting to kind of become something that you aren't quite. It's a mission to become an independent researcher, really. It's a mission to say, not only am I going to be the kind of person who knows a lot about a topic or who has acted as a sponge to become an expert on a topic, but who's going to challenge a topic and really stridently voice my own perspectives, but to do so on the basis of having done some work and having got some warrant for putting forward those perspectives. So I think the motivation for doing a PhD specifically, as opposed to another kind of qualification, is to focus on your research skills and then to be known as an independent researcher. I think that results in some interesting kind of tensions, because being an independent researcher somewhat paradoxically involves you becoming engrossed and imbricated into research fields and research communities, seeing how your work connects with other literature, rather than only thinking of what's been going on, say, in your institution or something like that. So being independent means recognizing what you're building on, recognizing what you're contributing to. And it also means stepping back from some of the kind of things that you might be more used to thinking about, such as what policymakers think sometimes, or what the next solution needed in an institution is, towards what contribution does the wider research literature need. To do that, you break it down into a load of skills that people tend to need to do or to have to be an independent researcher, such as, for example, managing a project, managing relationships with other scholars, managing relationships with stakeholders of research, making judgments. I think making judgments is an important one. It's not just about data crunching, it's about being able to say, well, the data is never complete. I'm going to have some basis for this, but I'm still going to put forward my own opinion, and so forth. You can break this down into a lot of skills, but ultimately, I think it's more than just skills. I think it's an identity progression. It's something that you want to be. There is this other question on this issue about is being a student important. I always find that question interesting. I mean, I agree with John, really. I don't see any problem in calling yourself a student. I'm a student all the time. I feel like a student every time I open a book, and I find that a joyous experience. I want to learn. I'm also constantly a student on professional development courses in my institution that I'm often compelled to do, you know. So I don't think being a student is ever something you should aim to get past, as though you're never going to be a student again. And probably the kind of person who I would hope would do a PhD is somebody who's eager to learn and never stop learning. Because if you're going to be an independent researcher, you're going to hopefully take that forward beyond the PhD and be learning and doing your own projects potentially for the rest of your career and or life. So it should never be a kind of closed thing in which you feel you know everything, otherwise no more research needs to be done. So I would celebrate being a student, and I would call myself a student in various places now.
I wouldn't disagree with either of you. I think we need to detangle scholarship from advanced practice to answer it properly, and studentship as well. I've always thought if it's feasible and viable for us to undertake something like a PhD by publication, or not to do a PhD and have a a rewarding research career, then we'll probably already be aware that it's feasible and viable for us. So we'd ordinarily, in fact, I'd probably argue that we have to be an active member of a research community already, where it makes sense for us because we've already got an established research profile and we're probably already leading things at doctoral level. But I think for the rest of us, undertaking a structured program is probably a more appropriate way, because we need to detangle advanced practice from scholarship. They're kind of different things, and it's as much about becoming and navigating doctorateness as much as it is about getting that kind of qualification. In some contrast, all of the people I've known who've gained a PhD by publication were already researching at that level. They were in a community that could support them very well, and they were established. And I think actually in all of the cases I've known, which isn't many, everybody around them was surprised to hear that they didn't already have a PhD. It's not something to take lightly. I think most of us would benefit from that independent but supported progression of a more established PhD route, because in addition to doing the research, we also benefit from that kind of socialization, I suppose, negotiating identity as a doctoral researcher. But sure, if you're already an established part of a research community, and you have been for a while, and you're the lead author of really significant and important papers with a world leading portfolio, then I don't think you'd even need to ask the question, would you? So yeah, I think for the rest of us, a structured program is more sensitive to what we'd probably need. Thanks.
I totally agree with that, because I before we started this session properly, I was just saying to these guys, if it wasn't a structured program, I'd do nothing for about 6 years, and I'll panic and I realize 80,000 words, 12 months, shit, that would be the reality for me. So there are, like as Phil, you alluded to, that you can get a PhD by publication, which we'll touch on a bit more in a minute, but what are the difference between doing a traditional route where you approach a supervisor and you with a proposal and they accept you, and then you kind of just do it that way, versus what most of us have done or doing, which is the kind of program route? Because I think people might want to know the difference, because doing a PhD is, you can do it in many different ways, and I think the traditional route and the program route are probably the most popular ones. So I don't know if anyone wants to open that conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in here. I mean, I think for me, I explored various PhD programs and also explored various supervisors that I might want to work with. And I'm a real procrastinator. I'm like you, Ian. I could be the person who's trying to write those 80,000 words in the last week. And I think by joining something that's a structured program, I know that I have to manage my time wisely, that there is a deadline. And whilst there might be opportunities for extensions, that's not really a good strategy to start with, and that by knowing that actually for the first 2 years I've got 4 modules, I've got to submit 6,000 words for each of those. It's maintaining the momentum, but actually also feeling that there are opportunities where maybe I can have a week without thinking about the PhD, and that's okay, because I think, like many people on the programme, I'm working full time, I've got other commitments outside of work, and I have to balance everything. I'm not, in the position of being a 21-year-old recent graduate who's got a fully funded PhD and can just think of nothing else for 3 years. So I think it's having that clear structure, but I also think there's a huge benefit to being with a fairly large cohort of people who are all trying to do similar things, or if they're quite different, there's still things that I've possibly got some interest in, and being able to learn from people from a huge range of backgrounds is really useful. So it's not just a group of British PhD students. So appreciate that the 4 of us who are here as representatives today are all sort of people who've been in the UK for a long time, but I think the fact that we've got people from a whole range of countries on the programme who are talking about education systems that have some very definite similarities, but some things where there are cultural differences, and they've got very different challenges. And I think being able to discuss those things and look at those issues with a range of people is really useful, learning from peers in our cohort.
Yeah, I'd agree. Okay, I'll fill the silence. I think the online structured programs for doctoral development, they do let us study while accommodating other commitments. We've got work, family, and lots of other commitments. So for me, I think that's really valuable if we're balancing a job in education and training, where we kind of have schedules that involve fixed commitments, things that we might not be able to shift around easily, things that we might not be able to ask colleagues to cover at short notice. And the arrangements, they do kind of let us look at module programs and calendars, and we can plan and we can mitigate risks to ourselves and others, I suppose. So you can access things within reason. You can access things at your convenience. You can speed up, you can slow down, and focus on specific things. I do think what else is important is the structure and established support. That but by structure and established support, I guess I mean there's a pedigree in the department of providing things at distance to people in our position, in the sort of life positions that Tamsin's describing there. I think the structured programs provide a kind of roadmap and a shared route. We don't all follow the exactly the same route, but we do have these shared punctuated checkpoints along that route. We have those shared touch points where we kind of get together, do some coalescing, and then separate again, and then come back again. So we have a shared understanding of how to problematize TEL. It's about practice, it's not about a thing. We have a shared understanding of what practice might even be, and things like change and that sort of stuff helps us to prepare for part 2, I think, at relatively low risk, where by the time you get to part 2, you've either kind of perhaps become a bit more confident in what you started out with, or you've trialed a load of different things and now you're more certain about which one to try. So the structure and support of part 1, it lets you navigate those things at relatively low risk with different people, because probably each module is with a different module convener. They all have different experiences, different approaches, and we get that kind of, it's a shared foundation, but it's a diverse repertoire, really, from being an advanced practitioner to being a scholar and a researcher.
I was going to say, for me, it was like, sorry, I wasn't supposed to talk at this bit, but it's just sparked something in me, and that's why I've put my hand up. But I think for me, it was about that scaffold into it. You kind of, I did my MSc, and I didn't feel ready to research further, and having a scaffold into, instead of I've mentored GTAs on their PG cert, and you can see that they're really struggling with the read things like basic things like research methods and stuff, because they're just being told, oh, do some research, just research it and things like that. And then getting scaffolded into it was really important in terms of that structured program to start off with. But yeah, that was just my 2 cents worth.
So I think the kind of programs we do take to a kind of logical conclusion a lot of tensions that have developed around the PhD for a long time, especially in the kind of fields we're talking about. So I think if you look at it from a distance, what people imagine a PhD is, and it is true in some cases, by the way, it's not merely wrong. It's a kind of dedicated period of your life where you take out some of your life. It's like the equivalent of maternity leave or something, but for a different purpose. Like you carve this period out and dedicate it. You kind of become lonely during that period and isolated and hide yourself away through a pile of books. That bit is a bit disciplinary specific. It wouldn't be quite so true in some hard sciences. And you kind of know from the beginning what you're going to study. Right? Your direction's set from day one. And for a whole host of reasons, that's been challenged for quite some years. There are quite a few people doing part-time PhDs, even if they're still part-time traditional PhDs. And they make a success of it, but they make a success of it through their own grit and determination, and in some cases, brilliance, perseverance, all those kind of things. What we've tried to do is to design a program that specifically allows for what we think people in that situation might actually benefit from, as opposed to them doing it despite the system in some ways. So the first thing is, this isn't a break out of your life. You carry on working. And in fact, you go backwards and forwards between your work life and your PhD life and a whole host of other spheres of life, including family and friends and socializing and all sorts of things throughout this whole period. And that's beneficial, we think. I mean, in some cases, it can be issues that you encounter in your professional or personal life that are going to serve as the stimulus for what you're going to research. Okay, so it's not an isolated sphere of life at all. It's a constant intertraffic backwards and forwards. It's not necessary that you understand from the very, very beginning what you're going to study. You know that you want to become an independent researcher, but you realize that there are various possibilities out there and you're open to negotiating what you should put your time on. So we have this structure of modules at the start for the first couple of years, which we call part one, where people can do things which are at PhD standard, but you're not yet committing to doing your whole thesis on that for years. It's a commitment of months, but not of years. So you write things which are of various lengths, and those sometimes actually get published. It's increasingly quite common that those get published. And you can gradually refine and develop your skills as well as your interests. So the time you start going into your PhD thesis, you're already well equipped. And it's also not supposed to be a lonely journey on the design of these programs. Various people have hinted at the notion of the cohort. So people are working in groups of, somewhere between 20 and 30 people usually in a cohort, get very close knit. There's a whole lot of stuff goes on in the background simply with students self-nurturing and supporting each other on things like Discord and WhatsApp, which is just brilliant to see because it's helping, it's providing a social support and the reassurance, despite the fact that in principle, when you go into your workplace or in your home, there really is probably only you who's that interested and knowledgeable about your PhD. And then if you talk about your friend, your PhD topic to your friends, they probably start, giving you the knowing glance that they don't want to hear about this for that many more minutes, right? That kind of thing. But actually, there's loads of other people who are interested. You can talk to them all the time. So I think that what we've tried to do here is to provide a format which benefits a certain kind of person. And in the TEL sphere, as well as in some of the other spheres our department nurtures, such as higher education and educational social justice, there's quite a few people in that position. So the final thing to say is we're drawing on people who are already professionals. This notion that you're going to become an independent researcher doesn't mean that you throw away the rest of your identity. You're already an independent practitioner or professional or manager or even in some cases policymaker. There are some things there that we can build on or reshape or use as the basis to become that independent researcher. So it's just a different kind of program design for a different kind of situation. And for us, I think it works extraordinarily well. although I would say that, of course, but the students here will doubtless back me up. Right?
I just want to come back to one of the points that Brett was making towards the end there about this idea of it being sort of scaffolded risk almost, that I think I came in really unsure about what I wanted to do. I had some ideas and then I threw them out fairly quickly. And I think just being able to think of something for 6 months and try it and look at a theoretical framework and explore it, and if actually it doesn't fit with what you want to do, then you've only spent 6 months on it, I think has been really helpful. And having the opportunity to discuss other people doing things at the same time. So Brett's nodding and smiling because I think half our cohort are exploring activity theory at the moment, and a lot of us have not necessarily encountered activity theory before joining this programme. So it's been a really interesting opportunity to look at something with a group of other people. And when some of us don't necessarily understand the papers we've read, we've had an opportunity to discuss them with people who are interested. And I think I mentioned before, we've come from very different backgrounds. So John mentioned doing his master's in blended learning not so long ago, whereas I spoke with Brett about this week, that it's been 25 years since I did my master's degree in a completely different area. So I think having the opportunity to learn from others, and it's not just the content knowledge, but also things like, how do I use NVivo? I've never used NVivo before, so having peers in the cohort who can explain how to use some of the relevant tools. I'm confident that I can use Word and I can demonstrate that to others who need help, but when it came to NVivo, I hadn't used it. And so I think having that cohort of people with different experiences has just been so beneficial, and the space to try things that I've not done before.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Tamsin said. And I just wanted to come back to, again, what Brett mentioned about, we're getting to be able to publish quite early on in our kind of journey. I never thought I would have been able to publish the first paper I ever wrote on a PhD study. Looking back now, it's a load of rubbish, but but that's progress, right? You're proud of what you've done right now, but 2 years down the line, you look back, you realize actually it was all right. But that's a sign of progress, I think. But I never, as I said, I never thought I would have been able to publish so early, and it's because of the support we're getting from the supervisors. They don't get you to write just for the sake of writing, so fulfilling the criteria to kind of progress. They get you to write to I think what the department describes as publishable quality paper. That's not to say they can't be published just yet, but it's the gap between your assignments and published academic journal publication standard is smaller than you would otherwise just write on your own, or so I'm quite grateful for the being on the program and being able to kind of be developed and exposed to different module leads and module kind of different theories. Although I put my foot down very early on, probably since the first time I met Brett, I'm not doing activity theory because mine is special concepts, and we've had many conversations about that, and we're just gonna have to agree to disagree and move on. but that's good, because also the program, because my concern has always been with traditional PhD, sometimes you're being influenced by a single person for an extended period of time, and it could be dangerous in my mind that, am I going to turn into an independent scholar, or am I going to turn into my supervisor? I don't know. But so I'm kind of grateful for the first 2 years in the program where we're exposed to various things and people. And I'll stop there. James.
Yeah, it's just quick, just following on from what you said, really, and touching on Tamsin's point about the structure of the program, and it is modular, so you can try something out for a little bit, and I found that really useful. It really has changed my thinking. When I came into this, I was right, okay, I'll do a little bit extra on this, and then a thing that I'm interested in, and again, one of these, I would chuck that out the window. And as I'm going through each of these modules and trying different theoretical frameworks and approaching things in different ways, it's it is doing that shifting, and I can already feel it, like as this week I've encountered something else which has again changed my thinking and an approach on something, and it's happening all the time, and you're building on something else, and it does feel like moving towards a a thesis. So I can recommend that, you know, as the structure. It's where it works for me, and I think it works for other people and everyone else that's got a PhD.
Thank you, James. So we're going to move on to the next thing about what I wish I knew before I started. I think it's fair to say everyone has something to say on this topic, potentially. All right, I'll go first then. So in the intro, I alluded to the fact that things, writing a thesis and sort of staff development, podcasting is something that I never thought I would even remotely be interested as a researcher anyway. So what I'm doing now is actually plan C, plan D. I don't even remember, certainly not plan A or B, that's for sure, because I remember I don't ever want to see the statement I wrote to apply to the program, because it's a load of rubbish. But if I remember correctly, I wrote something about I wanted to explore student how to develop their digital capability, which is a great topic to explore, but I'm no longer interested. And then as we progressed through the first year, towards the end of the second year, we had to kind of start thinking about what do we want to write a thesis on. And then I realized that actually having written a thesis is not the end of the world. It's not your life's work. It's just a project in your life. It's the beginning of something. And so I remember a conversation I had with Professor Don Passy, who was the program director until about a year ago. Brett took over the program. He said to me, do you want to do something that's really institutionally related and spend half your time cutting red tapes and trying to chase people for data? Or do you want to do something that you can have total control over, so you can actually finish your PhD in a reasonable time frame? And I said, it's definitely the latter. So I went from wanting to explore student digital capabilities through the use of e-portfolio, holistic learning, all the kind of stuff, to I wanted to explore podcasting, because I have enough friends who are podcasters who are actually doing great work from a kind of community perspective rather than through the institution. So for them, those are kind of extracurricular activities rather than they're required to do through their job. And actually now I realized, I've just finished collecting my data last month. I realized I made the right decision, because I managed to collect all the data in 2 months flat. If I were to go down the e-portfolio digital capability route, I would be collecting data till 2025. So, so there is a bit of kind of strategy involved with kind of having gone through the program. You then realize you have to kind of be realistic and do something that you're both passionate about and also something that you can actually have control. Otherwise, yeah, I'll be stretching out to 7 years plus more, and then my bank wouldn't be very happy about it. But yeah. I'm happy with the topic, don't get me wrong. I just didn't think I would do something that is kind of, dare I say, informal learning. I always thought I'd do something kind of quite formal, student learning type kind of topics. I still might go back to my e-portfolio idea, but like Don Passy said to me, do it when you finish, do it with your friends, then you're not then constrained by the regulations set by the institution for you to have to complete your PhD in a certain time frame. So there is that to think about as well, and something that I would never have thought about if I went down the traditional route, because I would have written a proposal and the proposal would have been accepted by supervisor, and then you kind of have to stick with that. So there's the difference here.
I think I'm sort of at that stage now of starting to think about what I might want to spend the next couple of years on, and I've come up with so many ideas, and I think James keeps giving me advice that's along the lines of what Don said to you. So maybe James is further ahead than he realised, and I'm trying to think about what's going to be realistic and manageable over the next 2 or 3 years, rather than, you know, sort of what do I feel I ought to be doing because my institution would like me to do it, and that perhaps doesn't inspire me. And so I've almost gone full circle to some of the ideas I had at the start of looking at accessibility, which is kind of where I came in. And yeah, it was digital capabilities that were trying to lead me astray, P.M., but I've kind of ditched that now, I think. Having done my last assignment on digital capabilities, I think never again. And I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of wish I'd known before I started that it is actually okay to change your ideas all the time. That I know we've got some people in our cohort who've come in with very clear ideas around, I don't know, gamification is one, and I think it's great that they've got that idea and they know that's where they want to go. But it's been really helpful for me to know that actually I can try something and decide it's not what I want to spend the next couple of years working on.
I'm trying to think what the advice I gave you was, and the only thing I can think of is if it doesn't spark joy, then burn it with fire. So something along the lines of, and you've got to love it enough to be interested if it's going to take that amount of time. And similar for me, actually, trying out activity theory in this particular module, the topic that I ended up researching, I think I've said this before, I don't really have an interest in the topic itself, but what I'm finding really exciting is about playing around with something different in a different way, and that's the thing that's keeping me interested. So the answer to the kind of I'm not sure about the topic is maybe there's an approach or a methodology or something else that's like is the thing that's your big hook that you can enjoy, and that's the thing that will carry you through.
Aha, beat you to it, Brett. We're both at the same time, pretty much.
Can I just remind you, John, at this point, Brett's your supervisor.
I know.
Let us sink in for a moment.
He's a good supervisor. I think the best advice that I got. There we go. So I think the best advice I got was from Brett, actually. So it might be the same advice that he's going to give, but it's my thing that I wish I knew before I started was no matter how small your idea is, make it slightly smaller. And I think you can go in sometimes particularly with the thesis, you can go in for your thesis, and because it's it's 50,000 words, you go in going, oh, I can write loads. But actually what you really want to do is think about the smallest thing you can possibly write about for 50,000 words. And so I think I went in I think I had about 3 or 4 research questions that I wanted to answer that would have explored the whole gamut of inclusive practice in the digital arena. And I wanted to interview all these people, and I was going to use IPA. I went in really wanting to use that methodology, like you were saying, James. I had a methodology that I really wanted to use, and Brett came back and was like, just make it a bit smaller. And then he said, make it smaller again. So actually what I ended up with is something that's really highly focused. And I think if you can kind of get that, if you can learn that in your earlier papers that you're doing, that you can focus down, then actually I think that's a skill in itself, really. And I think if I knew that at the start, that, to make it thinner, make it smaller, and that actually you find that there's a massive body on what you're looking at. But what matters, and this was the other one as well, is not looking for gaps, but looking for the angle that you're going to take into it as well. So, people think you have to obsess over gaps in the literature, but actually it's the angle that you take. So, so again, for me, looking at inclusive practice from the perspective of third space professionals, and then looking at how they make sense of that, it was an angle to explore something that I was really interested in, but there's a massive body of literature on inclusive practice. It just so happens that angle hasn't quite been explored yet, and that was the angle that kind of interested me. But yeah, so that was the thing I wish I'd known.
I feel slightly strange answering a question like this because obviously I'm not a student, but I thought I'd recount a few conversations in anonymized form, of course, that I've had with students that I thought were worthwhile. The first is about the fact that the PhD results from some sort of flash of inspiration or brilliance. I think that's very harmful as a notion, but it's surprisingly common that people think they will have an idea that's going to get them a PhD and it will come like that. And it leads to the fact that either they sit there waiting for it and don't do very much, or they're depressed that they haven't had it yet, or something like that, not quite realizing that doing a PhD is a process of work ultimately, And that if you let that go and you just allow your project to move forward and that the project is reasonable, eventually, actually, most projects do produce something quite interesting that could be of use to the literature. So it's a process, and you have to have faith in the process, and you have to keep working at the process consistently. I would say consistency is much more powerful than brilliance in some ways to get a PhD. Another thing is this notion that that I think is harmful, that people think, well, the PhD is the last or highest qualification I'm going to ever get in my life. So therefore, I'm going to put everything I have ever thought into it. This harks a little bit to the points that have been made by a few earlier people. I think it's better to think of the PhD as the first project you're going to do on a new trajectory, that actually it will carry on for a while afterwards. It's not quite as simple as this in practice, but I often get people to try and think of their PhD thesis as a particularly laboriously explained journal paper, but only one journal paper. So if you were doing a journal paper, you wouldn't think, well, every idea I've ever had goes into this journal paper. You would say, well, I might write 10 journal papers in the next 5 years. This is just one of them. So I will kind of bound off what this paper is about. And I think you need to think of your thesis in the same way. And these two issues are, the issue is linked effectively. If you think this is the last thing you're ever going to do, then it feels like if you don't put something in here, it's never going to be included at any future time in anything you write. And that's just wrong. It leads to this kind of melting pot, this kind of cookery idea of a PhD, where it's going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, where what you actually want is one coherent kind of simple narrative, hence me telling certain people to make their ideas smaller. And then the final thing, which I think people need to realize, is that writing produces new ideas. So sometimes actually doing the writing changes your mind, what you're going to think about something. But also, you're not going to run out of ideas. I think sometimes people think, well, I've got basically 3 ideas in me. And so I'd better, you know, this is the people who want to salami slice, and they're going to think, well, I've got 3 papers to produce, and then I've kind of run dry on ideas for the rest of my life. I think every time you write something, you have more ideas for the next thing to write by the end of it than you had when you started. You don't exhaust your ideas, you generate new ones. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think people worry about how much they're ever going to have to say, and so they start budgeting what they want to say and constraining themselves. I think you need to treat the writing process as itself generative and realize that there are so many ideas that you could have while writing. The only problem you'll really face is you have no way enough time to write all of those ideas in the rest of your life. So the only real problem is to figure out which ideas you're going to spend time writing on, not worrying about running out of the very limited number of ideas. Those are 3 kind of conversations I tend to have with students.
And it kind of goes back to what Patch says, hi everyone, hello. And it kind of goes back to what we said about you know, doing modules, and like John just put in the chat, the last module, you know, really cemented his thesis idea. And I think for me, it was kind of, again, towards the end of the second year, I realized actually my idea was forming, but I also realized that it wasn't going to be, it's going to be something I'd like to be known for, certainly for the foreseeable future, but not for the rest of my life, because, you know, I want to do different things. And I think, yeah, being on the program really kind of opens up my mind to think very differently to, yeah, from someone who's quite stubborn to now I'm open to doing different things and exploring. And if it doesn't work, like Jem saying earlier, was it burn it with a fire, wasn't it? So yeah, burn it with a fire and start again. Nobody needs to know, you know. We're going to move on to talking about the I think this it stems from John and I, and I can safely say between Tamsin and James as well, the love and hate relationship. The PhD has.
There's no hate here.
There is a certain level of competitiveness in a lot of us when we're doing a PhD, because it's a privilege to be doing it. Let's not, you know, kid ourselves about it. So I think sometimes it's about, for me anyway, it's about kind of having a balance between being competitive and supporting each other. and I don't know if anybody has something they want to kind of chip in and expand on.
So I'm going to wave off an experience from last week, actually. So I went to a former institution an institution that I used to work at, and I was sat with an old academic colleague who I get on really well with, and she was saying that she was asking me how the PhD was going and things like that, and she said, "Oh, you can then apply for academic posts, can't you? Which would be great." I was like, "Oh, I don't know whether I don't know whether I want to do that." And she said, "Well, if you are going to, what you've got to learn how to do is stab other people in the back." She said, because she said the only way to get into kind of a decent academic position is to learn how to stab other people in the back. And I thought, oh my God, that's the most negative view. And I thought, I'm just not that person. And then it obviously made me question, am I good for that? And then obviously I see the example set by, we've had all the most of the colleagues actually on here from the I was going to say that, Jan. That I see that approach in a different kind of way from this program, is that actually collaboration and openness is actually a much better way of going about things. That person worked in a very strict science kind of discipline, so whether that's kind of a little bit different, totally agree, James. Kindness does take you further, and that's so. I mean, I've always, I'm a former teacher. I've taught for 10 years. I've had to deal with some interesting young people in my time, and I've always been able to kill it with kindness. So. And that old phrase that my dad said, it's kind of, it takes less energy to be nice than it does to be mean about somebody. So and Joe pushing back and being healthier and more collaborative, and I think that's what certainly with the friendship with yourself, Pooey, and subsequently meeting yourself, James, and Tamsin as well through Alt, and then on this program as well, and actually the academic colleagues on this call as well. Gosh, don't blush, all of you, but actually it set a good example for actually what collegiality can look like in a lot of senses, and I think that's really important to understand what being collegiate looks like, and what actually caring for each other and working with each other, as opposed to going, oh, do you know what, I'm working on this. I suppose it was a Russell group, so I'm not gonna look me down my nose at Russell groups, it was very kind of, I'm working on this and nobody else dare come near it. I researched that first, and I'd worked on projects where I had contributed quite significantly to the design and development of that project, and then later seen it in a journal without my name on it and stuff like that. So which is why I'm researching predominantly third space professionals, third space professional views, because I've actually come that quite a lot in my research as well, that sidelinedness, being sidelined, it makes me very cross, because it's an injustice. So maybe I should be on the social justice program, who knows, but it's I think it's that we should be supporting each other, we shouldn't be sidelining each other, and I think even in the more difficult moments with this program, and I have, I'm not going to lie, I've dealt with a couple of difficult fellow students on this program, particularly when it came to peer review, where it's been very difficult working with that person on peer review, but we have a chat about it, and you have a chat with them and you realize they're human, they're just as scared as you are, and the comments that they're making sometimes can just be because I don't know what I'm doing either. And so having a little chat with somebody about it makes you actually understand, okay, they weren't coming from a place of kind of hating what I was writing. They were coming from a place of, crikey, I don't know what I'm doing.
All I was going to say was, like any powerful collaboration, John, for duty there, it can be socially antagonistic at times, as you know, and it takes work, but I think it's worth it for the longer term social support that you've generated, this being an example that, the stuff that we're doing now. As Kathy might say in a while, that sense of collaboration and collegiality, as you describe it, it doesn't happen serendipitously or accidentally. You know, it's designed for in the programs, and it's kind of provided for and facilitated. But people like you and Pu Yin and James and Tamsin, you're the engine of that. Do you know what I mean? You're the fuel of that cohortness and that collaboration and that collegiality. So those strong communities, they do form through your endeavours. It could be modest things like WhatsApp, it could be more ambitious things like, you know, the stuff that you're doing now. But it is important to, I suppose, acknowledge that they don't happen accidentally or serendipitously. It's because of people like you lot making it happen. Sorry, I probably sound really patronising there. I just wanted to make sure I noted it.
I think I wanted to come back to what John had written in the chat earlier about the benefits of peer reviews and sort of in every module having those opportunities to review the work of some peers, because I mean, Pu Yin had sort of alluded to competitiveness, and I think for everything that I've read in a peer's work, and I might have sort of done a little head shake and thought, oh, I wouldn't have done things that way, there's been something else where I've thought, oh, I'd never thought of that. That's a really good idea, and I'm going to draw on that in the next thing I do. Or that's a really interesting idea. It's not for me, but I just wouldn't have thought of it that way. So I think for all the things where I'm thinking, oh, I think I might have done something slightly better than somebody, there are things that I've looked at and thought, actually, they've done that much better than me. And so it's been really, really useful to learn from sort of the broad range of people. And yeah, even if they've written on something completely different from me, using a completely different theoretical framework, there's been some really useful things that I've got out of that I found really helpful. So I think it is that sort of not competitiveness, the opposite, the collegiality.
Yeah, I'd really echo what everybody's been saying, and I've just been reflecting, really thinking about assessment when you move to study at doctoral level, how that changes, you know, because like at master's level, you perhaps used to being in a cohort and everybody's getting a mark and thinking, well, so-and-so's done better than me, or, you know, sort of thinking, what exact score do I need to get this particular qualification? And at doctoral level, it's different. And beyond doctoral level, it's different, because everything is a work in progress. You know, when you submit your assessments, and the department has a lovely system of giving preliminary feedback so that your final piece of work is different to the first piece that you submit, which I think is a really positive thing, because you know what you end up with, you feel like you have done your best. But even when you submit your final thesis, you're going to have examiners that are looking to see, can we help you to strengthen this piece of work? And then when you start writing up and doing journal articles, and it's getting used to that idea that this is a research community. And even, you know, the nasty reviewer number 2 who's going to make it really hard for you to publish your paper, that what they're supposed to be doing, and what we're all supposed to be doing in that process, is making work the best that it can be. So it's moving on and thinking about that in a different way, thinking about assessment in a different way. And I also wanted to share my experience of researching a WhatsApp community, because that's a community of postgraduate researchers that I joined when I was new to doctoral level study, and I didn't expect that it was going to you know, have much of an impact on me. I had an invitation and I thought, oh, do I want to do that? Not sure, a bit ambivalent, but actually being part of that community, and I'm still part of that community today because it's carried on past, you know, when many of us completed our studies. Yeah, it's been for me a really supportive community. It's, you know, it's a bit of backstage where we can really share our emotions and what's going on for us in our lives and get support. We can learn from each other. We can support each other's professional development. So, you know, my advice would be, if you get the opportunity to be part of a community of peers, grasp it with both hands. And if you're part of one of those communities, put in the effort to keep it going, because it will give you more than you ever put into it.
I think quite a few of the previous points have been kind of harking at the social production of knowledge, I suppose. I think that's at the heart of being competitive, is not really recognizing how this is supposed to work. So partly this is about the process, that knowledge is often constructed socially, including in groups and teams and all kinds of things like that. And trying to pretend otherwise seems to me slightly odd and even sometimes dishonest. I personally have always had a very generous policy of trying to put everybody who was ever involved in a project on say the authorship of a paper, sometimes more than is even standard, because I recognize their contribution to the wider project, and I've never suffered from that. Nobody's ever said, oh, well, your career would have been much more advanced if you were the single author, or there were only 3 authors instead of 6, or whatever. That's never, ever happened to me. So I think the costs of this are imaginary. They're not very real. And then the other sort of implication of this is the knowledge product. So I think it was John who was saying, oh, you know, only I'm allowed to write on that as opposed to somebody else. But you'll write different things. You know, the knowledge that you'll produce won't be the same. This is maybe the same. This is maybe a repeat of the gap spotting kind of thing, that maybe there's only allowed to be one paper on a topic, and that's the knowledge. And then after that, that will be the knowledge, and nobody else will challenge it because there isn't a gap there anymore. I don't think that's my view of what academic knowledge is. It's like a perspective that contributes to a discourse in the community, which then gets improved and challenged, and different perspectives are offered and so forth. So even if 2 people with very similar perspectives wrote on the same topic at the same time, I'd expect both papers could easily be published if they make a good argument, because they'll be complementary to each other. So there's just no need to be competitive about papers in any kind of way, to me. And so, for example, at the moment, literally today, I've had a colleague of mine who does similar work to mine, albeit in another country. It turns out is writing a book on activity theory and technology enhanced learning, writing a book on it. And all they've done is ask me if I will look at parts of their manuscript to improve them. And yes, so obviously what I should do if I was following the colleague's advice is give them the wrong advice so their book doesn't get published, so that I can get my book out first. I think this is that does not work. Well, I hope he produces a brilliant book. I will read it and give it to students. And at some point in the future, I might write a slightly different book, and that won't cause my book to suffer in any kind of way, in my view. So the competitiveness is just totally unnecessary and false, I think.
I just wanted to say, I think what we're talking about is dare I say, it's the kind of newer way of doing things. I hope academia has turned a corner, because there's no secret to many of you that two recent experiences I had was that, you know, as a PhD student presenting at conferences with my research, obviously very close to my heart, and those research would have been approved by Brett and Paul Ashby, my supervisor, and other people. Yet at an international stage, those, dare I say, I know it's on a recording, but I don't mind saying it, those old farts would say you're wrong because you've used the wrong terminologies in this theory and we don't like it. So there is the kind of, I think academia inherently has been problematic in some ways, where, you know, we are the old gatekeepers, we don't like new people. And I'm just really hoping it has turned a corner, because what my experience with Lancaster certainly has been the opposite to what I sometimes experience externally, you know, with various engagements with other well-renowned scholars. I think I'll stop there before I take a deeper hole for myself to fall into. But I'm just saying that I totally agree with what you're saying, Brett, and I love what we're doing here. But I think we're not quite there yet as a whole sector. So because my last engagement with someone saying I was wrong and they were right was actually March this year, 2 months ago. So there we go. Moving on to the next topic of discussion, that is challenges and managing relationship between supervisors and students. Anyone wants to start on that topic? It's a real thing you have to manage, right? I think Tamsin and James, you won't have done that bit of the program yet, but I think, wasn't it right, John, when we started Park 2 earlier on last year, where we had some discussion with Brad about how we manage our relationship with our supervisors? Could that can affect your well-being and your progress massively. So anyone wants to
I couldn't possibly comment about my relationship with my supervisor, except to say that it is wonderfully positive, which it is actually. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because the kind of I'm sure Brett won't mind me saying that I'm taking him firmly out of his comfort zone with my research, in that I'm using a methodology that Brett's not used before or come across before, really. And I think that makes for an interesting relationship, because I'm immersed in it and I'm reading every single flipping textbook, and then Brett then has an outside perspective, which I'm actually finding super useful, because it gives it that objective kind of point of view. And I think that's, I think I found that relationship handy. I'm not just saying that because you're here, Brett. I'd speak my mind. But I'm not just saying that, but because Brett's here. But I think that I need that challenge. And also, and I've spoken to Brett about this as well, I'm the kind of person who thrives on feedback, no matter how negative it is. So if I get feedback about what I'm doing, and I think having that understanding in that relationship, that I know that I can ask Brett a question about something and he'll think about it, and if he doesn't know the answer, he will either find out or tell me where to find the answer, is really useful as well. So I think that I think the challenge for me is realizing that I'm is my lack of self-regulation quite a lot of the time in terms of particularly data analysis, and that I'm finding that really hard at the moment with workload from work as well. So, but I think there's that understanding in the program that I have a full-time job. I'm in a senior position in my institution, and so therefore there's going to be pressures on me at different times a year. And I think that understanding that relationship, and my big thing is, it sounds really bad, and Brett, this is no reflection on you, it's the idea of not disappointing your supervisor sometimes as well, not being able to go to a supervisory meeting and go, oh my God, I've not done anything. Oh no, what am I going to do? Do I just fess up, or do I pretend that I've done something? And I think the best bet is to just fess up, say, you know what, work's been absolutely crazy. I've not managed to do anything, but can we talk through a few things? I've got about 5,000 words of a methodology chapter or something like that. Can we just have a little chat and a little cry about workload as well? And I think that's the positive things about having a supervisor, and feeling like you can rely on a supervisor to we meet once a month, and it's a positive experience for me anyway. Can't say the same for Brett. But I've only analysed 2 out of 8 cases, and it's taken me 16 hours. That's kind of,
I think we might end up circling back to the earlier stuff we were discussing. I think the challenges that you're drawing out there, John, are for both parties, aren't they? So it can be challenging as a supervisor to maintain a kind of boundary of influence, I suppose, providing support without taking over too much, and helping people draw out ideas and material actions that might be possible, but without being coercive, and providing advice in things like practical design and conduct and communication research, but without imposing your own voice onto what needs to be someone else's work. Ultimately, it can be quite difficult. There are loads of other challenges. One's one I just noted earlier was reminding people to celebrate successes and to remember, you know, as we were saying earlier, this is important, but so are loads of other things in life. And it's finding a way to say that to somebody without being condescending, to say, you know, this isn't kind of solely an intellectual endeavor. Sometimes it's about just keep plodding on, but, you know, without damaging other things that are going on, really. I guess it's easy to get sucked into this orbit of a 2-year or longer endeavor and forget, you know, we've still got family and work and friends and other things to deal with. And to find something that's achievable and that matters to you, that you've got a stake in. It probably won't change the way the whole world conceives of TEL, but that kind of inch wide, mile deep notion that you were talking about earlier, you know, the narrower you come in, the deeper you can go. If you go too broad, you can only go shallow, can't you? So if you find something bounded and contextualized that really matters, I think that helps when you, at some point, you've got to dig into your personal reserves, haven't you? You've got to kind of keep going somehow, and if it matters to you, then maybe you're more likely to do it. So, you know, something that matters for maybe local social practice rather than something that's completely revolutionary for the way people use AI in classrooms or something like that. And sometimes it's also about, without being coercive, finding a way of saying, are you sure you might not want to take a bit intercalation here? This, you know, that kind of conversation, the pastoral conversation as well, you know, how do you negotiate all that?
That's right. That's quite leading to what's good leading to what I was going to say. Actually, it's, you know, it's about relationships, and I think I don't know anyone that hasn't experienced a moment where they've rubbed up against someone completely the wrong way, accidentally, and I think it's kind of a reminder that people do have other lives and things that go on in the background that they don't necessarily want to or can share, or you know, the supervisor might not be in a position to be able to say, oh, I can mentor you on this or coach you this or something else, but it might just be a know thyself kind of conversation. Do you need me to provide you with you know, signpost you to something? Do you need me to just sit here and listen to you? Or as a student, I just need you to do X, Y, Z, and then the supervisor can say, I can't do that, but I might be able to do this. So there's a little bit of I don't want to use the word negotiation because I don't mean it in that way. It's not negotiating to you know, you're not trying to buy something in a way. It's a conversation between two people, and you want to have a shared goal of you know, being successful in achieving the final thesis.
I totally agree with what you guys have all said about, you know, I think because for those of you who don't know, in our department, if you're on a program, you don't necessarily get to choose your supervisor like you would in the traditional route where you approach a supervisor, as we've talked about a couple of times. You get assigned a supervisor based on your interests and to an extent workload, and so it was a little bit of a kind of and just way for us all, you know, towards in a part one who we were going to get, because we might get someone whom we have never spoken to, as it was in my case. I only went and got the head of department at the time, and I've got to be really honest with you. When I found out Professor Paul Ashwin was going to be my supervisor, I was really worried because I never spoken to him, and he's like up there, really, really well established, really, really well known HE researcher. But the first time we met, we just hit it, because he told me, look, I don't know much about threshold concepts, and I don't need to know about threshold concepts because you need to know about it. It's my job to tell you how to PhD. It's not my job to tell you how to write how you write your theory, how you write your understanding, how you position yourself in the literature. It's my job to guide you through the process, and it's been great. And as I said in the message, the chat earlier, I sometimes disappear for months on end. And then he would email me and be like, is everything all right? I'm like, yeah, I just haven't done anything. So my relationship with Paul is probably a little bit different with the relationship between John and Brett. We don't meet every month. Sometimes we don't meet for months, but then we meet for very intensive, like every other week for a short period of time. And I was a bit concerned, like, am I taking advantage of your time? Because the regulation says you allow one supervision meeting a month. that's what it is. But he said, you know what, it evens it out at the end of the day. It evens out being about 12 a year or whatever, so it doesn't matter. And it also depends on what you're doing, because I was collecting data and I didn't really need much input because I was doing interviews, etc. And it will come a time very soon where I would need a lot more input in really just tidy up my writing, really get him to sign up the chapter. So again, it really depends on how, I guess what I'm trying to say is your negotiation with your supervisor, what works for you. You know, John and I have talked many times. What works for him is the regular check-in. It doesn't work for me because I've been in meeting with Paul where I just sit there and I try to fill the time, and it just turned out it wasn't productive for neither of us. It was a waste of time. So I just kind of decided that, you know, we'll meet as and when I have something to say. It's just different preferences, I think, and you need to kind of find that common ground that works for both of you, because supervisors are busy people. I think Phil and Brad and Katie and Kathy can say, I think you guys, each of them have like 20-25 at least students at any given time. So you see a lot of people, right? Is that right? Have I got a good number right? About 25, give or take. So
I think Brett's got twice as many as the rest of us. I think that's kind of how it works.
So yeah, it really is about just having a frank, open conversation with your supervisor as early as possible, and just establish some kind of code of conduct in a way, how you want to move forward. I think, you know, that's what I think works for me and Paul. And that nicely brings us to the next point of discussion about time management and focus. And we all have full-time jobs. Some of us have kids, other caring responsibilities, etc. And you throw a PhD in the mix. How do we manage? Other than we don't have a life outside of, you know, but that's yeah. Go on, James.
I think that's the point. Like, we do have lives. So it's, I don't have children, but I do have, I say, care and responsibilities. I've got my cat and a partner as well. Obviously that's the in the pecking order. It's has the cat had the chicken, and then have I fed my partner, or the other way around sometimes. I want to kind of signpost back to something about Tamsin saying towards the beginning about having that structure as a program helps you manage your time, and Brett saying about going back and forth between different periods in your life. And for me, I think I had this conversation with Brett, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I was talking about how I like playing games, and I had to stop playing certain games in order to free time up to do this PhD stuff. And yeah, I kind of had to make those decisions very early on, looking at the description of the program on the site, and it was saying, you know, this is going to be about 3,000 hours over how many years? So that's, you know, 12 to 15 hours a week. I'm thinking, right, okay, what am I doing 12 to 15 hours a week that I need to stop, or I need to think about what else I can be doing? Do I need to be a bit more careful with how I spend my time and how I prioritize? And also because I do have a partner, and I had to do some preparation with them as well, which is you're going to be going out and doing socializing or other bits and pieces. You know, we like going out, have a good time, good party, go on holiday, all these sorts of things. And there had to be an honest conversation of, right, hon, you can go out and have a good time. I've got to sit here and write 100 words. I'm really sorry. Like, it's a thing. And I can very much imagine people also in other types of jobs where they might be teaching. They've got marking to work around, other time commitments. It's really hard. It's really hard, and it really forces you to think about how and in what way you get distracted and what you do with your thinking, and that when you're making notes, you kind of want them to count. So very early on, sorry, I know I'm rambling, but there's some practical stuff. Very early on, finding some sort of note-taking application or something that works across lots of devices you might own, because you could be sat on a bus or waiting for like the microwave to go ping, and then you have an idea and you need to write it down somewhere, because if you lose it, you've lost it. And it might be the thing, I know we've talking about like the spark, or like little ideas or things that lead on to other stuff. That might be the thing that completes a sentence, or follows into a new idea, or somewhere you want to research. And also appreciate that it's a marathon, it's not a race. So I personally, I've mentioned 100 words. I try and write 100 words a day, and then I stop. I don't do any more. And then the next day I write 100 words, and then the next day I write 100 words. And to write those 100 words, I might read like 4 or 5 different papers or do something else. You know, each block of 100 words, I might have read 500 words or something to narrow it down. But just doing that little bit, breaking it right the way down, and then you can still do other things in your life. It's probably enough for me, because Tamsin's got a hand up. I'll let my work wife speak now. Yes.
I mean, I think one of the things that James said that was really important was kind of preparing the people around you, because I'm sure there's other parents on the call who've had the same experience as me, where my 7-year-old recently has been talking about careers and what she might like to do when she's older. And she said to my husband, well, I don't want a job like mummy's because she's always working. And I did feel really, really guilty. And yeah, I do try and do most of my studying when she's gone to bed, but she doesn't sleep as many hours as I'd like her to. So that's been really difficult. And I think it is kind of trying to plan it around things like family life can be challenging, because that's been really hard. And unlike James, I'm not somebody who does a steady training program. I'm the person who thinks a couple of 5Ks will train them for the Marathon des Sables, and it will all take place at the last minute. So I think that's quite tricky, but the cohort support is useful. And I think having sort of WhatsApp chats, I mean, we've had people who have been in our cohort WhatsApp chat, and they've just want some reassurance from others if there's been some huge crisis, whether it's a natural disaster in their country or family crisis, ill health. And it's the kind of thing where you would think, well, of course they will be given an extension, but they've just needed to check with others, you know, this terrible thing has befallen me. Do you think it's okay for me to ask for an extension? And I think that's been really helpful, that people have felt there's others they can check in with, and would all say, well, yes, of course you should apply. But the time management can be tricky. And I think it's, yeah, I plan ahead a lot of when things will happen, just so that I'm not completely giving up on family life. And it's an acceptance that, you know, before this, I did a lot of competitive triathlons, and I accept I can't do that if I'm going to have family life as well. So the odd 5K run will have to do.
Yeah, crikey, I won't be competing in any triathlons, so I didn't have to give that up. Thankfully, that's small mercies. I think the thing about the focus aspect of this question is you have to actually believe and care about what you're doing. I think one of the worst mistakes that you could make is to convince yourself that in some way it's not going to be very difficult. So sometimes you might choose a project, whether it's in a module or, heaven forbid, for the thesis, that you think is simply practical and easy and straightforward, and that is the reason you've chosen the project. Because when inevitably it turns out it isn't very easy or straightforward, and that there's going to be some kind of hitch in the road anyway, then suddenly you're demotivated. So you need to be aware from the beginning there will be difficult times, and you're going to pursue this because you care about it. That's, I think, the first thing of managing time, because actually what happens with managing time is no matter what you do, there'll come a point you can't manage it very effectively, and you just need to keep clinging up. And it's that belief that does that. Otherwise, you just kind of fall off it. I think the two things that I tend to tell people about, the first thing is the number of things to have going on about the PhD at any given time, not in your whole life, but specifically for the PhD. And I am so confident about this that, sorry, James and Tamsin, you heard me talk about this at the residential only a few weeks ago, but I think having 2 things is the right number. I think there are some students who want to focus on everything. If it's their thesis project, they're going to be writing a bit on every single chapter. They're going to be getting data and transcribing and analyzing. It's too much. it's diluting your attention. You can't possibly focus, and what actually happens is you leave the difficult things that you probably should be doing because you can convince yourself you're busy with something else. So I think you need to have two things, one of which is clearly the priority, and then a backup thing you can do when that really can't be done. You're not having downtime. So for example, you might be working on a chapter that you're going to send your supervisor, and then while your supervisor's looking at that chapter, you've definitely got one other thing to be getting on with. And then probably the other thing, it links to the question about collaborating with a supervisor, is having somebody's input into what you should be doing next, having an overview, trying to be strategic about which part of the puzzle you're filling in next, because sometimes common sense can take you down the wrong path there. For example, some people are determined to write a paper or a thesis in the order in which the reader's going to read it. And I don't think that that's the most efficient use of time. I think there are certain chapters in a thesis you can easily write first, and they're not always chapter one. So having an explicit discussion with somebody is useful. The other point I would make is about frankness with supervisors, but I think John covered that very adequately. And I should say, yes, John and I do mainly communicate via our lawyers. By that point, it's obviously going swimmingly.
There will be no lawyer involved. We can't allow that. John, would you like to come in and give a response?
That's okay. I should be sending my next letter through my solicitor. Oh, Brett's gone. That's it.
He's
He's done.
Angry. He stomped out of the room.
I think he said he was having difficulty with his connection.
No. That was just a funny. He's so angry. He's just left.
So I think we're going to talk about kind of some progress and outputs, weren't we, a little bit in this next little section. So a couple of you are going to share about what you've been doing and what you've been kind of thinking about, but also I think we're going to talk a little bit about alternate outputs, things that you can do while you're plodding along as well. So who's going to come in and talk about that? I think Kathy, you were going to say something about alternate formats, weren't you? Let Kathy talk.
Yeah, I was just going to mention about having a research website, because I'm really pleased looking back that my supervisor suggested that to me and suggested it before I put my ethics application in. So when I was doing my participation information sheets, my consent forms, I included that and got my participants' consent to have a research website. And it doesn't have to be anything too complicated. I use WordPress for mine, and my daughter helped a lot with that. And yeah, I'm still, years on after finishing my doctorate, I'm still getting 20 or so hits a month on that website. So there are still people that are interested in reading that output. So it's good to think quite early on, what are the different ways that you can get people engaging with your work, and build those in at an early stage. And I think Katie has more ideas for you.
Oh, thanks, Kathy. Yes, I was going to say a bit about sort of thinking about ways to share your thesis contents more generally, because whilst I would generally, I would completely agree that the first and foremost the idea with your thesis topic and your project is for you and for your development as a researcher and your interests, but also not to hide it, because it's you will produce a thesis. You will be have a strong contribution to make. If you're interested in it, then other people will be as well. So this is something that doesn't necessarily have to wait until the end. Blogging is not for everyone, I would say, but if you'd like to try blogging about your research in progress, then it can be very useful. something happened to me with a blog post when I was a PhD student that ended up being in the New York Times and various other things, but that's probably a different story for a different day. But that's, yeah, was perhaps an extreme example. But it's a useful way of getting sort of engagement, getting other people's perspectives outside of the group as well, and also to think about not just necessarily the findings from your thesis being the main thing that is publishable. Your literature review, you may have contributions that you can make around methods if you're doing something innovative or taking a particular slant on things. And I found that looking out for special issues of journals on particular sort of focused on particular topics can be quite a good outlet for those things if you happen to find something that's really very closely aligned with what you're doing. Yes, to shout about it and share your work with the world.
I totally agree with what you just said, Katie, about kind of, particularly with sharing your work in progress. This might be, I don't know, this might be disciplinary related, but there are some people who are keeping the ideas and their work in progress and their data so close to their chest until the whole project is completed when they're allowed to publish. That might be the case in, I don't know, I'm just making a guess, like if you're doing a clinical trial, you probably can't publish your data until everything is concluded. But I think in social science and educational research, what we do is very, very aligned, closely aligned with what we do professionally in our day jobs. And I'm all for one of the reasons why I got appointed to my current job to kind of oversee the kind of scholarship development at Queen Mary is because of my kind of belief of everybody have something to share, even if it's just very sketchy, very kind of beginning of something, just sharing ideas. And I think if I remember correctly, I don't know which centre at Lancaster, Brett or Jan might have to come in to confirm that. You have a publishing writing in progress sort of thing, because I saw a couple of people from our program published a draft article through one of the centres. I can't remember which one, not our one. So there are channels where you can publish or showcase your work in progress and get feedback from people and then develop from there. I presented a paper I wrote in one of Brett's module 2 years ago last year at a conference, and people weren't remotely interested in the research question, but they were interested in everything else I talked about, and it really changed the direction of the research completely for me to want to pick it up, but with a completely different perspective, something that I've never thought I would want to do. So there can be surprises, happy surprises as well, if you're open and willing to share your early stages work in progress with people. So yeah, anything, yeah. So Jan just say part of the chair is Centre for Higher. Can someone just decipher that acronym? Centre for Higher Education, Research and Evaluation. Is that right? Yeah. So
well guessed on the acronyms there, Puyin.
I did just get on the acronym there. Sorry, because I've seen, Katie, you quite regularly post sort of like pointers to various sort of groups for early career researchers as well, didn't you? There's been don't you? There has been a few initiatives as well. I don't know if you want to promote those, because
yes, well, I'd say just have a look at what's out there, really. I haven't got any ones to promote particularly at the moment, but there are various things. There are lots of opportunities at conferences for doctoral students to participate as well, which is very useful. And even though Twitter isn't quite as active as it perhaps used to be in terms of academic community building. It's still there, and there are it's still pockets of communities that are still very useful to even just listen in on to begin with. Yeah. I
know we're running a touch behind, but I just wanted to kind of relate it back to something else as well, that and this could be a paper in itself, you know. So if anyone's thinking of struggling for research ideas, here we go. So it's the impact it's had on my practice as well. So the research that I am doing is impacting the way that I work quite significantly, actually, because of what I'm finding as I'm going along is making me go, oh, do you know what? I've not thought about that. Oh, I should consider that. Oh, I should do it. I should do this. I should try that. And I think what you can't kind of, it's the little impacts that it's having as well. So while going out and doing and presenting at conferences and things like that, I think reflecting on those little changes in yourself that you're noticing can be really quite magical as well. So I went and presented last week at my old work, as I said, and I was presenting on inclusive curriculum design. I'm a learning design manager, so you know. But then because I'm researching inclusive practice, I had a lot more to say than I think I would have done a year ago about it, because actually my understanding of that field is exponentially grown through doing this. So I think that's the hidden impact of a lot of this stuff. I think that's quite but yeah. So while we talk about outputs and sharing and doing things, I think there's also that hidden little bit of output, because I wasn't sharing my research, I was sharing something else, but what I was sharing was directly influenced by my research. I was very tempted when I was putting the presentation together to put quotes in from my participants, but I didn't deliberately because I thought, I don't know if I'm allowed to share that yet. So I didn't, but I knew that there were things that I was putting in my presentation that I knew I'd spoken to participants about. And yeah, so that I think that's quite a nice way of reflecting on it as well.
Kind of, I think what we're looking at here is kind of looking at checkpoints to, for lack of a better word, to fill in a good gap between writing something to eventually publishing something, because the road is long. You know, I mean, you know, with all the love to our editors out there, sometimes it could take over a year just for your paper to get to the reviewers, and then it could take even longer for your paper to be published. So, you know, instead of sitting in just waiting for that to happen, which is great, I'm not disregarding the importance of proper academic journal publications, but there are so many things you can do to, you know, build up your CV or just practice, like Kathy was saying earlier, you know, even just going to conferences, talking informally, those kind of corridor chats, or one of my previous colleagues would describe those as the water cooler chat. Yeah, anyway, those sometimes I think are the most interesting conversation, the little sparks that you wouldn't expect in any kind of formal settings. I'm about to submit a paper to a conference that I don't know if I'm allowed to go, but I don't care. I'm going to submit it anyway, because why not, right? Because I think sometimes the act of submitting a paper to a conference and getting those feedback, even if it's a rejection, could be quite useful. You know, don't get me wrong, reviewer 2 is a real thing, but you know, sometimes you get really nice feedback as to why they reject your paper. Then you realize, actually, I've been living in a silo. These are the things that I hadn't realized. So sometimes getting rejection, I know it sounds weird, but I don't mind getting rejection, because sometimes that could be quite useful as well.
It's one of the most useful thing that's happened to me. I put in a paper for a journal and it got rejected, and the feedback was absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic. It's one of the best journals that I've kind of from. You hear the horror stories, but yeah, I got rejected, and I was very clear as to why. And I thought, do you know what, I'm going to at some point tweak that, and I've just not got around to tweaking it to make it fit. So other things, life's got in the way, and now it's 2-year-old research, but it could still be, it's still relevant, I think. So
it's not too old. I mean, the data is still relevant. I think I asked Brett this question: how old is too old for data, and how many years did you say? I don't want to. I know I remember what you said, but I don't want to put you on the spot. I mean, it's an open question. How old is too old for a set of data? I think that's a question everybody wants to know. What are your experiences?
I don't think I would put a number of years on it, to be honest. I mean, it's about whether the argument is still a contribution to the literature that you're trying to aim for. The example I tend to give is that I put in a paper to a conference in, I think it was 2012, but I might be mistaken, but something like that. And then eventually that conference was turned into a book, which came out in, I think, 2022. So there was like a 10-year gap, and it was hardly a changed paper. They did ask me to update a couple of things, but this book came out of a conference series, and this paper was suddenly resurrected 10 years later on the same data, and nobody minded. It was, still a perfectly reasonable paper. So, a decade is doable from past experience. I would say Katie made a good point in the comments.
Yes. So yeah, getting involved in being peer reviewers at journals is a really useful thing to do. There are several journals where you can sign up sort of on the website to volunteer to be peer reviewers, and then it's useful for experience for you to see sort of the types of things that are coming in, and to sort of hone your skills of analysing the construction of a study for a journal article, and also it's a good way of sort of building up sort of social capital with journals as well, which I think is helpful too, because typically a journal article goes out to at least 2 reviewers. So I always think to myself, I should be reviewing twice as many papers as I'm submitting. Otherwise, the whole system sort of breaks down, because it's based on that kind of reciprocity. So it's useful to very valuable to learn from, and also good sort of academic citizenship too.
I think, Brett, you mentioned something a couple of years ago to us, that you do a lot of peer review as well, and you kind of see it as a commitment, like Katie had just said, like commitment to kind of giving something back to the community. That's how you keep the whole ecosystem going, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's a good to know, because I remember reading on social media once where an author who's published 6 articles in a journal in the space of 2 years or however, like really short space of time, refused to review anything because he hasn't got the time, and he got everybody angry because, well, you've got 6 articles, our of us, we're asking you to review half of that, and he said no. So there is that kind of the other side of the coin. But we're going to end the session on a good note. I think personally, for me, I never thought doing a PhD would, and not just saying it for saying so, I never thought doing a PhD would be fun. I never thought I would make so many friends with my peers. I mean, John and other people, and obviously Tamsin and John, James, and also with the supervisors as well. I honestly thought it was going to be a hard journey where I email my supervisor, they don't respond for 6 months, because that is a version of the reality. But I just wanted to say that thank you. It's all I can say. It's not over yet. I've just finished. It's not. I sort of say it's been a fantastic a time where everybody's been really friendly, and I think if you wanted to go back to the session where Jan MacArthur and Paul Ashwin, who talked about a little bit about how you kind of break down barriers as kind of your mission to make sure the department is an inclusive, friendly, welcoming place. I think there's a lot to do with that, where you've set the tone right for us to want to just very friendly, you know, because it's a special circle, isn't it? If the people who you deal with are mean, then you are mean back to them. If they're nice, then you want to, you know. So I don't know if anybody wants to come in and just not let me have my. Here you go, James.
It's just good. Yeah, same as you, P. And I wasn't necessarily expecting to start a PhD with like, oh, I'm going to collect some friends as well, like Pokemon. You know, you don't come in like that, but you end up like you do form friendships, and you kind of need those as well to get you through the moments where you're almost like you self-paralyze, where you think, oh, I really don't know what to do next or whatever. And sometimes it's easier to talk to your friends on the cohort as well first than it is to possibly email your supervisor and say, here's a prompt to put in Gen.AI to like turn your brain inside out. Sorry, Brett, I know. But it was nice to have the image back as well. Yeah, it was that's a really important part of this program, and you know, similar setup. It's the friendships.
Yeah, I've just got a picture up on my phone. There's me and a guy called Knife, who was on the program with us, and there we are on campus. Knife had travelled to the UK for 3 weeks with his family, and they were doing a trip to London. They were in London for 3 weeks. He travelled from Saudi Arabia. Had never really left Saudi Arabia before, and sent me a message saying, John, I'm coming to Lancaster. I know you live. So I for context, I live 45 minutes drive, maybe 50 minutes. Well, I'm a lunatic, so 45 minutes drive. Probably about an hour for normal people. But so I live about 45 minutes drive from the campus, and in my speed. And he knew that, and he said, can you come and meet? It'd be great to meet you for a coffee in person. So he travelled up from London for the day, met me on campus. We had a coffee, had a really nice chat, and then was it. And we still chat. I think he left the program, unfortunately, because of his work situation, but he still chats to me. He still sends me messages, asking me how I'm doing, and he sent me a whole during he did his pilgrimage to Mecca and sent me a whole load of pictures, which I was fascinated by, because you see it removed, but seeing somebody's experience of doing that was amazing. But it was just really nice, so you meet these people, and we've met in London with Francie, haven't we, Puyin, who traveled over from Boston, in Massachusetts. So I think it's really nice to make those international connections. So people that I would never have normally spoken to, although Puyin did know of me before, but that's a question.
I hated you before. I thought he was an arrogant geezer.
Yeah, making you walk through Stargates for a presentation. Yeah, so that's a whole different story. Please, just so it's great, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I think just to for the purpose of the recording, because I know people have left now. It's without being on a program, there wouldn't be this series, because it's something that there wouldn't be one. It was just because through talking to the right people and having found the right team, the right partnership in John and Francie and other people, that we managed to 2.5 years later to still have a sustained and useful channel for people to share research and as a community. So yeah. All right then. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and have a good time.
See you later, everybody.